Welcome back to Learn at Home, everybody. If this is your first time, thank you for tuning in. We're so excited to bring you a really special guest speaker today. And I'll be introducing her very shortly. But we just wanted to give a shout out to our very generous supporters, including all of you who keep coming back to learn at home with us at TreePeople, and various sponsors, including Subaru and Gene Senator Legacy Fund, who have supported us from last March when the pandemic hit, and we launched this virtual program to continue bringing you awareness and information and learning and growing together. So today's topic, as you are aware, is urban forest inequity, a look at causes, effects, and solutions. This is central to our work at TreePeople, and our guest speaker, Edith, is going to be talking about TreePeople's work as well, because she is actually a former tree person, and she was the director of research at TreePeople for 6 years, and I believe for 10 years before that, she was also at TreePeople, and now she is with the LA Urban Cooling Collaborative, and also a PhD candidate at UCLA. But I will let her introduce herself and pass the mic to her without further ado. So I'm going to stop my screen share and she can share her screen. And by the way, my name is Emmy and I'm going to be your moderator. So I just wanted to also mention that we'll be doing a Q&A at the end where we'll be, fielding your questions. So please feel free to put any questions you have in the chat. For those of you who emailed me questions in advance, I have those questions that I'm going to be posing to Edith. And yeah, we just want to hear from you. So don't be shy. Put your question in the chat and we'll be addressing those at the end. So without further ado, I'll pass it on to Edith.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Emmy, and thanks to TreePeople for inviting me back. You're quite right. I was at TreePeople for a good long period, 17 and a half years to be specific, up until about 6 weeks ago. But I'm still very engaged in the work that TreePeople does, and I'm still partnering on some projects with TreePeople. So it's my pleasure to continue to be able to do all of that while continuing my studies at UCLA. So let me go ahead and get set up here. I'm going to try to set this up so that I can actually see the chat at the same time, which is always a little bit tricky for me, but let's see. Would you let me know if you can see that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Wonderful. All right, so as Emmy mentioned, we're really going to take a deep dive today at some of the causes, effects, and solutions around urban forest inequity with Los Angeles as our case study, so to speak. And I'm going to present a few questions for you to think about. And that I'm really organizing the presentation in a way that makes us kind of ponder a few different questions pertaining to this larger issue. So the first question I'd like you to think about is, why do some neighborhoods have more tree cover than others? And certainly if you have driven around or walked around Los Angeles, you know that we have extreme variation in that. Here's an example of that. We have places like Watts in the city of Los Angeles with about 10% tree cover, and another neighborhood in the city, Bel Air, 35% tree cover. In Watts, we have a household income annually of about $25,000. In Bel Air, it's $200,000 in North. So there are some interesting implications here for sure. And these are not the only neighborhoods where we see that. Let me show you a short video here, courtesy of the kind folks at the Coalition to Preserve LA, who shot this drone footage with Boyle Heights on the left and portions of Brentwood on the right. And one thing I want you to notice is that the homes are actually quite sizable in the Boyle Heights neighborhood too. So you see that the housing is not all that different in terms of size, yet you can see that the disparities between tree cover on the right and the left are really pronounced. So we're gonna next do a little polling here. Now that you've been pondering this question, I'd like you to go to menti.com and enter the code that you see. Let me see here. Of course, now it's going to, here's the code right at the top of the screen, if you can see that. So menti.com, put in the code 9417219. And you don't have to see me on the screen as you do that. We'll have a little interactive period here. And what I'd like you to answer is why do you think that is? Why do some neighborhoods have more trees while other neighborhoods have less trees? Why do we see these disparities? And in just a moment here, we'll start seeing some of your ideas popping up. And if you see something popping up that you agree with, you can type it into your own screen or on your phone, and the word will get bigger. So we can see that more than one person has indicated that racism has something to do with this, income has something to do with this. These are, yeah, we've got some really great thoughts here. Education, the luxury effect, community prioritization. So where do we prioritize? Funding, walkability, socioeconomics, biases of various kinds, public space, so the availability of space, size of lots, beautification, and maybe a prioritization on that or on other things. Multifamily, so maybe more of a preponderance of multifamily housing instead of single family where you might have more space. Zoning, absolutely huge. Lack of resources, city planning, urban planning, population density. These are all really great, and you're right. These are all really good reasons why we see these types of sometimes rather extreme disparities. So let me go back to the presentation now, and I'm gonna keep your Menti open because I have another one that I'm going to be presenting to you in a little bit. So you've already touched on this issue, and I'm going to share a bit more about one of the causes that we see here. And that is redlining, which is a practice by the federal government that started in the 1930s and was in effect until 1968. And what this housing policy did is essentially grade neighborhoods throughout the country on a four grade sort of scoring rubric, with A categories being the best or green, B categories being blue and considered still desirable, yellow categories being definitely declining, this is C categories, and then D or red categories being hazardous. And here is what this map looks like. And the reason this matters is because individuals in the lower categories, in the C and D categories, did not have access to housing, loans, financing, and insurance, which means that there were the right conditions for disinvestment in communities, in some communities, while there were the right conditions for investment in others. So here's what it looked like, roughly just some zoomed in maps from Brooklyn, Los Angeles here in the middle, and then Chicago on the left. And I encourage you to check out this website. You can see it at the bottom, Redlining in New Deal America. This is the University of Richmond that took these historical documents and digitized them. And it's quite an eye-opening experience to look through those. This is another product that they produced, taking those redlining maps. What the University of Richmond did is they looked at the historic side of things, and here's Los Angeles on the left, and then they looked at social vulnerability today. So historic on the left and today on the right. And what you can see is that regions that were yellow and redlined today still suffer social vulnerability across a variety of different factors. And you can see that some of the areas that were a little bit, oops, a little bit, better sort of scored, ranked in the blue and the green, have fared better today. So this is a first indication that there's some legacy impacts even 50 years after redlining was concluded. So let's dive in a bit and look at Los Angeles a bit further. So I happen to live in this area that's circled on the map, and I actually live in Brentwood, but it's the lowlands of Brentwood, as we say, and if we're right adjacent to the Veterans Administration, and this is an area that was formerly redlined. I actually did not know this until a year or so ago. I was quite surprised to find this out, given that it is Brentwood. So here's what the language, the actual historical federal government language was about the neighborhood that I live in. You can see that they named which kinds of undesirable sort of nationalities there were in this neighborhood. And we see here this really insidious language: continued infiltration of subversive foreign elements. And believe me, if you dive into this a bit, this is not even the worst of the language that you can find, but it gives you an indication that, as some of you indicated in the Menti, racism is at play here, and we see it very clearly. So what this data kind of indicate is that there might be some legacy effects. And so we have this study that came out last year by Vivek Shandas and Jeremy Hoffman and Nick Pendleton, and they decided to look at 100 or so urban areas in the US, including Los Angeles, and ask the question: how do historically redlined neighborhoods relate to current patterns of heat differential, intra-urban heat differences in urban heat amongst those particular urban areas? And here's essentially what they found on the front of tree cover. So this is looking at today's information, today's data, today's imagery. What do we see? We see that in the Western US, as in other parts of the US, the green areas, the best, the A categories, all have significantly more tree cover than the yellow or red lined areas. And you can see it's extremely pronounced in some cases, but in all cases, we're looking at a range of about 2 to 3 times more tree cover in green areas than in red areas. Here is sort of another slice of this, and this is some forthcoming work again from one of the co-authors here. And what we see is on a national level, again, looking at these A through D, with A being the best and D being the worst, there's just a preponderance of impervious cover, impervious, built environment, land cover that makes it much more difficult for tree canopy to be established. And you can see that conversely, tree canopy is much lower in these areas. It's higher in A areas. They also took a look here at across these categories of, again, A being the best, D being redlined. What is LA's land cover? And what you can glean from this particular graph is that in these redlined areas, there is just much more higher density, medium and high density development. Whereas in these A categories, you can see there's more low density development. And that again speaks to how much space you might actually have available to host more tree cover. So we looked at the redlining impact on tree cover today. Now let's take a look at what they found for the redlining impact on temperature again today. What they found is that across the board, there were differences, and the average of those differences between redlined and non-redlined neighborhoods was about almost 5 degrees Fahrenheit. but it was up to almost 13 degrees Fahrenheit. So this is really, I think they were surprised at how large sort of a difference that would be. And this is within the same urban areas. We're not talking about comparing different cities. And you can see that in the West, where we are, those differences are very pronounced. So now that we know a little bit about one of the causes, one of the very, very predominant causes for these disparities, a second sort of provocative question I'd like you to consider is, where should we plant in order to maximize benefit and address inequities in urban forest cover? And this may seem like a simple question, but it's not, because especially in places like Los Angeles, we have an extremely large geographic area to cover, and you have to, consider where to prioritize in order to maximize benefit and address inequities. So a number of us set out to sort of ask this question and then answer it. And I share this misquote of Lewis Carroll by George Harrison. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there, because while there has been excellent data from sort of remote sensed sources to give you a general idea through various national land cover data sets and the like, those types of imaging can be really effective for doing the kind of study that I just shared with you about the redlining. But when you want to get, really specific and have that acupuncture-like approach of looking tree to tree, you need even richer data. You need really accurate, granular data. And so a number of us set out to try to answer this question of, like, how do we actually plan? How do we know where to go and which areas to prioritize? And so with support from the County of Los Angeles and the LA Regional Imagery Acquisition Consortium, and with funding from the Forest Service and CAL FIRE, we were able to put together a project team that took some very granular, wonderful data and produced some maps that we can now use in order to take that more acupuncture-like approach. And so what we did with these data that we were able to obtain from the county and from LARIAC is take different types of imaging. And very importantly, it included light detection and ranging, LiDAR data, which is essentially a very, very rich three-dimensional picture of the ground below, including heights. And you can see, as you can see here, you can actually look in the shadows of buildings, whereas you might not be able to quite tell what's going on in just actual true color imaging. It's a little hard to tell in these shaded areas and so on. LiDAR takes care of that. And so we were very fortunate to be able to use that to derive tree canopy and ultimately look at land cover across 8 different land cover classes. And this enabled us to do a couple of things. This enabled us to look at existing tree canopy cover, that is, understand exactly what currently exists on the ground, but also to look at the possibility of growing tree canopy. Where might it be feasible to increase tree canopy, both in areas that are currently pervious, that is, covered, maybe ground cover or dirt patches, but also areas where it might be feasible to remove some soil, some pavement, large parking lots, potentially other areas that may be able to go with a little bit less pavement. And here are some of the findings of that assessment that was done with that rich data set. We found that in the city of LA, the 3 land use categories that are really important for thinking about protecting existing tree cover, and that's seen here in the green, those 3 land use categories are residential, recreational, and public right of way. So this means we really want to think about protecting tree canopy where it exists, but we also wanted to look at where are there more possibilities? Where is the highest sort of uh, uh, where are the highest numbers of available spaces for adding more tree cover? And here we find that actually it's the same three that come up again. The largest opportunities happen to be in residential, recreational, and right of way. And this is important because you can think about how to create programs that can grow tree canopy in those areas. So that was for the city. Now let's take a look at the county. So in the county, we found that existing tree canopy is highest in actually in recreational areas. The largest amount of tree cover in acreage, I suppose, is in recreational areas, followed by residential and then public right of way. But we see that there's slightly different. Residential in the county, as with the city, is the most important for increasing tree canopy, as you can see in the possible tree canopy here in the orange. So that's one of the findings. Another finding of looking at these data with some other data sets was that existing tree cover is higher in older homes. Now, there are a few reasons for this. Trees take a while to mature. So you would expect that newer homes would have had less time to let those trees mature. But we also see that there are trends in development that are really favoring larger home sizes relative to the lot size. And so what you see is that after about the year 2000, there's a pretty severe drop off in the amount of tree cover that there is by homes. We also found, and this is maybe not a surprise, but it's fairly eye-opening, nevertheless, to see it, I think, in this format. Um, the higher the home sale price, the more likely you are to have higher tree canopy. So lower sale prices are certainly in some ways correlated to lower tree canopy. We do know, there's plenty of literature that sort of indicates to us that having more tree cover can help you fetch a higher home price, which is perhaps both a positive and perhaps not a very positive thing in such a hot sort of market and an expensive sort of housing market. But this is also an indication of neighborhood. Again, think about the two, the comparative images that we looked at the beginning, where lower housing price areas are those that have less tree cover. So this is a complicated set of legacies that we're dealing with, and we're still seeing today. We also found this rather eye-opening finding. We do know that tree cover is far from equitably distributed, but what you see on this particular slide is that each of these rectangles is the representation of a census block group in the city of LA. So what this indicates is that about 20%, about 1/5 of the entirety of tree canopy in the city of Los Angeles is enjoyed within just 5 census block groups. And Brentwood is listed twice because there are often more than one block group per neighborhood. So 2 of Brentwood's happen to be on this particular list. So again, about 1/5 of tree canopy is enjoyed by five census block groups, where less than 10% of the land area is taken up. So the disparity is pretty astounding. And these 5 census block groups make up for about 1% of the city of LA's population. So again, distribution is beyond inequitable in our particular city. So we set out to map all of this and come up with an assessment that really would allow us to zoom in and understand where to plant and how to plant. And we set out to build a accessible online viewer And here I really have to say that there was incredible work done by Dr. Shenhua Jia at Chapman University, who was the architect behind this. So we set out to create a basic tree viewer where you can explore tree canopy from the parcel scale to the city scale. We also created a more advanced viewer because there was so much really good data that we could explore that we wanted to create a viewer that also allowed people to explore the different types of land cover, not just tree cover, but also all of these other layers. And one of the features of the tree viewer, the advanced one, is that it allows you to look at opportunities for increasing tree cover by looking at where is it, very low existing and very high possible tree cover. So that you can see that the green areas are those green and the green areas here, which are quite urbanized. Those are some of the best areas to increase tree cover because we believe, based on this assessment, that there are possibilities to increase the tree cover there. So that was exploring the second question. Now let me pose another question to you, which we all wanted to answer. And that was, could changes to land cover, we saw how land cover is sort of distributed in our area, in our region, could changes to land cover, and specifically here we're interested in trees, more trees, and then more reflective materials. So in the built environment, if we took some of those heat retaining materials and made them more reflective, could we cool LA enough to save lives? And so here we have our second mentee that I'd like to ask you to answer. So go ahead and go back to that same mentee, and we will look at our second question. What groups do you believe are most vulnerable to heat? When you consider the fact that less tree cover affects some of our most vulnerable populations, what are those populations? What are those groups? This is great. Yeah, so you're already hitting the nail right on the nose there. Absolutely. So elderly, the houseless, people of color, animals, kids, folks in lower economic areas, the disabled. I mean, you're all getting a PhD along with me here. This is great. These are all exactly correct. Those with health problems. Wonderful. So this is wonderful. Thank you very much for participating in that. So let's explore this a little bit more. A number of us got together and we wanted to answer that question. We wanted to see what would happen. We're in a kind of a dire situation here, but can we take an optimistic approach to increasing tree canopy, increasing reflectance, which is also called albedo? And so we tested these various prescriptions, as we like to call them. We thought about Los Angeles as an ailing patient, a patient that's ailing with extreme heat. What would we prescribe that patient in order to reduce the heat? And we decided to play with different levels, different dosages, let's say, of tree cover and albedo, or solar reflectance, specifically of roofs and pavements. And so we tested it in different levels, low, moderate, and high. And we did this in a few different scales. And then we also ran some climate projections and looked at how we could make this available to other regions. Here's what our prescriptions essentially looked like. So we tried high tree cover, low albedo, and vice versa, medium of both, and so on. So what did we find? So we learned from our researchers that there are different weather situations that really make us more susceptible to extreme heat. And there are two particular air masses. Think about like the Santa Anas that come through in Los Angeles. That's a particular air mass, right? So there are certain types of air masses that are just the killer ones when it comes to heat. And the two that are worst for Los Angeles are dry tropical and moist tropical plus. So that's just what they're called, and I'll refer to them in a little bit, but I just wanted you to understand that broadly. So what did we do? We took 4 heat waves And we looked at different types. We looked at the hot and humid type, the drier type, something a little less extreme. We wanted to see how just a more common event would look like, and then a very, very hot, dry Santa Ana type. These were historical. And then we looked at what would happen, what would have happened in those particular instances. How would the county have sort of performed, if we had higher degrees of tree canopy and reflectance. And so what we see here is with our RX1, our first prescription, low tree cover, high reflectance, what we find is that over I think the date, the time dropped off. This is morning, afternoon, and evening. Cooling is indicated by the darker blue. So we see that we would be able to produce quite a bit of cooling. We also see that there is occasionally some heat that is produced as well, because heat moves from one part of the county to the next. So this is kind of behind the scenes how the modeling looked. And that was at the county level, but we also wanted to see what would happen on a district by district level. And pardon me. And what we saw there is that we were able to create these various districts that are based on socioeconomic, but also climate and housing density factors. And here's just one of the outcomes. We ran many of these. This is for our more ambitious RX4. This is both high tree canopy and high albedo. What you see here is this. There, we were able to reduce the number of lives lost during this particular heat event, in some cases by more than 50%. And this is significant because during some of the worst heat waves, it's not uncommon for Los Angeles to lose several dozen people. So if we're able to do this per heat wave, think about multiple years or decades, how many lives we would be able to save. Now, we also wanted to think, this was a historical analysis, right? So we also wanted to think ahead. We know that LA is warming. We've all felt it. We had the hottest day ever recorded in LA County just on September 6th of last year, where I believe Woodland Hills hit 121 degrees. I like going to Death Valley, and that's the kind of thing you feel in Death Valley, not in Woodland Hills. So we wanted to ask, how many years could we potentially delay climate change warming in Los Angeles? And we did this by looking at the fact that we know that climate projections based on the models, there is a trend. There's a trend line that we're aware of that Los Angeles is on. It is warming every year. And so would we be able to basically move that trend line down or flatten it by adding more trees and adding more solar reflective materials? And what we found is that essentially, yes, we could, if we were ambitious, if we really did this, if we really stuck to these prescriptions, we could, under these various scenarios, we could delay the warming effect of climate change in Los Angeles by 25 years, we say 28 years, we see even 60 or more years. So this was very encouraging, and we thought would be a good way of looking at it. So here's a summary of the results that we had on this particular question of more trees, less heat. What could we do here? We found that temperature reductions under these various scenarios often exceeded about 2 degrees Fahrenheit and went up to almost 4 degrees Fahrenheit. This doesn't sound like a lot, but believe me, from a health perspective, it is a life or death difference. We also found that 25% reductions in heat-related deaths are possible, saving dozens of lives during the worst heat waves. And we found that heat impacts of climate change could be delayed, as I mentioned, several decades. So now let me ask you a fourth question. What do you think Los Angeles is doing? Are you aware of anything that LA is doing beyond these interesting studies? That's fine, we can do studies, we can do research, but what is Los Angeles actually doing to address urban forest equity and cool down heat vulnerable neighborhoods? So let me share with you some of the encouraging actions that I'm seeing. TreePeople is among a number of organizations that is really committed to getting more trees in the ground and caring for those trees so that they not only survive but thrive. And here you can see just a smattering of organizations and and uh, and departments within the city. The county has its own as well, and we have 88 cities that are all concerned with this in one way or another. But there's also really encouraging work happening on the second front, the other half of our prescriptions, cool roofs and streets. And here you can see a couple of the organizations that are really engaged in the work that's happening, including some really forward-thinking pilots that have created these cool streets. Here you can see on a hot day difference between a cool street and a hot street. We've got it's 148 degrees versus 135 or so. Cool roofs are also really critical in LA City and County. LA City passed the first large-scale ordinance in the country mandating that all residential roofs be cool. And here, the reason why I included this image on the corner there is because cool roofs don't necessarily have to be white. I mean, yes, lighter colors are more reflective, but there's been a lot of advancement happening in creating materials that, for all intents and purposes, look just like regular, sort of roofing, but are very highly reflective because of some great technology that they have included. Now, all of these actions are also supported by very bold targets that have been passed. We're very fortunate in LA to live in a very sort of progressive region when it comes to this. And so LA's Green New Deal, which is the city of LA's sustainable city plan, has very ambitious targets for increasing tree canopy in areas of greatest need by 50% by 2028, which coincides with the Olympics coming to LA. There's also a very ambitious target for reducing urban temperatures significantly. And the county as well, in their own sustainability plan, has very ambitious targets for tree planting, up to above 20% of baseline currently where we are. And I just wanted to tell you about one other effort that a few of us are working on, including the city, including we've got individuals from TreePeople, we've got city plants. And this is an effort that has enabled us to hire the first, what we're calling urban forest equity visiting scholar in LA. Vivek Chandas, if that name sounds familiar, it's because I quoted some of his research on redlining a little bit earlier. And what we've done is we've been meeting every couple of weeks. I actually just got off a call with them 5 minutes before this webinar started, and we're looking at how we can really position Los Angeles to address urban forest equity. One of the first things we did is Vivek and his staff conducted in-depth interviews with about a dozen different entities that have a stake in urban forest management in Los Angeles. They produced this report that is now available, found some convergent and divergent themes out of that to really think about where are we and where could we go. And what we're working on right now with that group is looking at all of LA and identifying different tiers of planting opportunity. If a site is tier 1, it means there's an available tree well or a planting space, and it's fairly easy. There's not any site modification needed. You could ostensibly go out there and plant tomorrow. But then there are these other sites. Minimal site modifications might be needed. You might have to do some removal of concrete or asphalt. So that represents a larger investment, but it's still possible to do it. And then there are these really difficult areas, the tier 3 areas. Drastic site modifications are needed. And if you think about the images again that we looked at the beginning of this presentation, unfortunately, what we have is densely populated and densely sort of built out areas that have the lowest tree canopy, which fall largely under these tier 2 and 3, which means we need to start putting our money where our mouth is and really investing deeply if we want to, sort of address this issue of urban forest equity. Here's another way of kind of looking at this concept. These tier 1 areas, the easier to plant areas, there's not a lot of effort, but they also don't bring necessarily the highest degree of greening. So you see greening here on the x-axis and the effort and investment required to make it happen here on the y-axis. So what we really need to start thinking more deeply about how we start removing more concrete, how we do some planting in median strips and create actual modifications, additions of urban roadways, so that we're not prioritizing cars, but actually prioritizing health and both public health and environmental health. So I'm coming up at the end here, and I want to leave you with this question. And this is sort of a rhetorical question for you to consider. I actually don't know if I ended up putting, let me see, did I end up putting a Menti on this one? Oh yes, I did. Wonderful. How smart of me. So here is the last Menti that I'm going to ask you to answer, and then I'm going to be quiet. What actions can you take to help advance urban forest equity and cooling in your neighborhood? What might you be able to do at your house? What might you be able to do elsewhere? Maybe on your block, on a school property, maybe your kids go to once COVID is done and they're actually back in the classroom. What other types of actions? And here you could, maybe you're a renter like me, so maybe you feel a little bit more limited in what you can do, but you could still have some ideas here. So this is great. So I love what I'm seeing here. First of all, volunteer. That's fantastic. Spread the word. Yeah, so now you know about these issues, and I bet you knew about them anyway because you showed up to this, so that says something. Plant trees. Plant on balconies. Yeah. Lobby, yeah, vote, request free trees. Yeah, you can request free trees, and TreePeople can give you all sorts of information about where to find that. Advocate for good policy. Yeah, do all sorts of advocacy. Talk to your landlord. Yeah, I mean, I talked to my landlady and we planted 18 trees and we installed a rain barrel here. And if you hear loud noise, ironically, there's wood chipping that's happening right outside right now. So this is wonderful. Donate trees. Guerrilla gardening. I like it. I want to know who wrote that one, and if you go out in the middle of the night and do some of that. In any case, I really thank you for inviting me. I love the energy with all of these ideas that are coming up on the screen. Let me just leave you with my email address if you're interested in getting in touch. And I also wanted to give you the links to the tree viewers that I mentioned, and also all of the prescription urban cooling work that we did. You can find out all sorts of information about that at treepeople.org/urban cooling. And thank you very, very much. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much, Edith. We will be including these links in the follow-up email where we'll be sharing the recording, and also Edith's contact information as well. So, we just wanted to say thank you, Edith, for presenting us with this valuable research and data. And at TreePeople, it's important to, for us to tie the research to real life, which is why we have, the research department and we have community organizing. We try to tackle situations from all angles. And today we wanted to actually share the perspective of one of our staff members. We have staff at TreePeople who have been impacted by this exact, urban tree canopy inequity. And so we just wanted to briefly pass the mic to someone on our team, Maria Adame. She is going to quickly share her story with us.
Thank you, Emmy. Hi, everyone. As Emmy just mentioned, my name is Maria Adame. I am a youth leadership coordinator with TreePeople. And my job is essentially to go out into the classroom and support students in making their ideas come to life as far as service learning projects go. So we want them to take action on the things that they feel passionately about, and that's what I love to do. And the reason I even ended up doing this job is because of something that I experienced in my youth. I was born here in the US, but moved to live with my grandparents in Mexico for a few years in my youth, and returned when I was about 7 years old. And I remember when I was living in Mexico, I had, I lived in a farm, and every day in the morning we would go milk the cows. Um, the nature was my playground. I had a ladybug hospital. There were these, I remember there vividly, there was this huge tree that had these giant seeds, and I would take the seeds and I would rub them on the ground until the friction warmed them up. I would pretend to cook them, but I would also chase my brother around with a really hot big seed. And that's the experience that I had growing up. But then once I moved back to the US, I actually moved to a small apartment in North Hollywood. And the experience there was drastically different. There was no longer this great big opening of trees and bushes and plants that I would play with, or even bugs, and that made me really sad. But it didn't just make me sad for me, it made me sad for everybody who was around me. I had been fortunate enough to have the opportunity to get to know these different trees, and I kind of had an instinctual, and I think nature is this instinctual thing for very many people who grow up with it. But a lot of my classmates didn't have that same affinity for the outdoors that I did. I remember a lot of them had fears that a bug would come by and everyone would run away, while I would see a red ant on the ground and I would pick it up, because apparently my mom taught me that if you bite your tongue, the ant isn't going to do anything to you. And obviously I think that was just her way of encouraging me to explore nature without being afraid. But I did notice that. And I noticed the inequities and the differences that that had on my mental health, my adaptability, as well as a bunch of other different things. So growing up, I kind of had that in the back of my mind, but I never thought that I wanted to do anything related to science, because if I'm being honest, I was kind of bad at it. So I never thought I'd be here. But then I saw the position for ecotours educator open up, and I applied. I got the job. It was just meant to be something that got me through college. But once I was there, I started to see what I already knew in the students that would come up and visit our park. I remember vividly one day the students got off of the bus, and these were elementary school students. And one of them looked at me and he said, "Is this where the brujas live?" And for those of you who don't speak Spanish, the question is this where the witches live? And I realized that for a lot of students who don't have access to nature, what we're experiencing is that they view it as this magical, majestic world that is so far out of their reach. It must be something from another world. And that just made me feel really passionate about bringing this information and my experience and utilizing it to, inject in all of the students that I meet every year, to share this information with them, and inject that motivation within them so that they can go out, carry out service learning projects, help us care for the trees that we plant, and ultimately hope that they help us carry out our bigger mission, right? Which is to inspire and have fun with all of the people that are around us, and to share our model for the world. So I hope that added a little something to this presentation.
Yes, thank you so much, Maria. And we're getting, requests for your contact in the chat. So if you could provide them with, we do have a entire environment education program where we work with youth. I'm also a youth coordinator, Maria and I, working on a program called Generation Earth. So she will give you that contact. And in the last 10 minutes, I wanted to get to some of the questions for Edith. So again, Maria, thank you so much. If there's any more questions for Maria or Edith, please put it in the chat now. So I did get an email from Gregory for Edith. The question being, certain neighborhoods consistently refuse trees, often quite emotionally, to the point where some streets have almost no trees. Have others experienced this, and what has been done to be more successful in getting trees into communities that really need them?
I guess it would help if I unmuted myself. At least I'm not a cat. I guess that's good. So it's a really fundamental question that you ask, and different communities or different individuals in communities have different experiences with trees, and there are reasons why some people really love them and why some people have a more complicated relationship with trees. There are cultural reasons, there are individual, like, sort of historical reasons of how people grow up with, what their relationship might be. So I would say that this issue of coming up against resistance potentially is a very real one. Where I think organizations like TreePeople do really well is that they don't come in and plant for a community, they come in and engage communities, and it's really the reason why people is in the name, because it's really community based. So their type of programming equips individuals who have a green vision for their neighborhood to bring that to fruition. Other organizations or other planting models might actually just plant trees in a community without very much community engagement. And at TreePeople, we've definitely seen that that's not as successful an approach, because we don't know all of these communities, but community members in those communities do know them, their neighbors, and so we equip those individuals who've sort of stepped up and want to create change, to know how to recruit volunteers, how to get the permits for tree planting, how to get the trees donated, how to have an event. And so when you have that kind of contact on the ground, it tends to break through some of the barriers. There are other approaches as well, and the City of LA, along with the organization City Plants that TreePeople is a partner of, they're trying a different approach called the Tree Ambassador Program. It hasn't launched yet, but it's going to launch in the spring. And that is actually an approach that will find folks within various communities and actually hire them part-time to become tree ambassadors for a limited term. And I'm hoping that it's more than limited term. Sounds like a pretty cool thing to have someone in charge of planting more trees in your community and get paid for it. So they're going to try that. And so there are these different approaches, but this is a tough issue. It's a tough nut to crack, and not an easy thing to try to solve. But certainly listening to the community and working with community members seems to be the most promising avenue that anyone has tried.
Great. And I think this also relates to Jean's question on how do you address homeowners' fears of tree roots interrupting their sewer lines. So we have some other questions coming in. Shannon's asking, are there funding mechanisms for any of the low or mid-tier efforts? Trees are free, but consistent watering is pricey. Thanks.
Yeah, so let me actually say that consistent watering is not very pricey. We found that perception exists in certain communities, but if you get a tree planted in front of your home, in the parkway, in the public right-of-way there, if you had to water it every single week, for a year, it would cost about $5. Now that's not free, but we equate that to like a dozen eggs. So for the price of one egg per month, you could have a thriving tree. So we do want to make sure that people understand that that watering a tree is not a huge, it's a commitment in terms of actually doing it, but it's not a huge economic commitment, especially when we consider the benefits that we get. You'll get reduced energy bills as that tree grows. You'll get habitat. You'll get shade. You'll get psychological benefits, for actually having nature near you. So are there funding mechanisms? The other part of the question was, are there funding mechanisms for any of the low or mid tier? Absolutely. The tier 1 efforts. We are very fortunate in the state of California to have a variety of different funding mechanisms, from greenhouse gas reduction funds, et cetera, the cap and trade dollars that are paying for trees. and in some cases also maintenance. But we do need more people to step up and actually care for those trees, because planting is a one-time thing, but care is a 2, 3, or 4 or 5-year effort. The mid-tier, the more difficult efforts, there are some grants available for removal of concrete and so on. The more expensive efforts, where you might actually add, bump outs to a city street or that kind of a thing, cities can get funding for that, and sometimes they have some funding for that in their own budgets. But those are definitely more pricey. And with the COVID economy right now, all bets are off for what will be necessarily available in the coming years. But we're certainly hopeful that this kind of information will help elevate the argument for why we really need to put our money where our mouth is.
Great, thank you so much, Edith. And Shannon clarified that she meant consistent watering by the city is pricey.
Thank you, Shannon. That's a really good point. Yeah, consistent watering by the city is really expensive. I mean, hiring those crews and having the trucks, and not only that, I mean, it's like, do we really want to be driving water around? Is that there's all sorts of kind of climate implications right there. So we're really, one of the things I'm doing in my PhD actually is looking at this question of, like, can we actually just get individuals to care for the one tree in front of their home? And is that a way for us to actually boost community resilience to a whole variety of different stressors? So anyway, contact me offline if you're interested in chatting about that. But you're right, it's a big challenge.
Awesome. I don't think there's any questions in the chat. If I missed a question, please let me know. And yeah, there's just great comments from the audience in the chat. So thank you for being extremely engaging. And thank you again. Thank you so much to our speaker, Edith. This has just been such a energizing conversation, and the Learn at Homes always leave me with so much inspiration and just a commitment to improving our, urban forest. And just great to hear from, folks who care and folks who are doing the research and doing the, from all angles. So I guess all hands on deck towards a more resilient future. And so, yeah, keep following us. We're gonna be, doing another topic next month on water and the LA River. So that's gonna be exciting. And if you have any ideas for topics that you're curious about and want to hear from, then feel free to reach out and give us suggestions. So thank you so much. And we will be sharing the recording and resources and Edith's contact as well. So have a great rest of your Wednesday. Bye, everyone.